Hey guys and gals, Shane Stevenson, Director of Museum Collections Curator here at the Buffalo Naval Park. For the past few days, I have been going down a favorite rabbit hole of mine, and actually not even as long as I would like. But kind of collating some data, there's some interesting stories that kind of arise, or at least interesting facts and figures that arise. This is primarily about the shipyards that constructed destroyers and the length of time that it took for them to build. And then maybe some of the reasons why it took that length of time. So as with anything of this nature, I usually show my sources. So we've got Warship Builders, one of my favorite books now. We actually had Thomas Heinrich on our YouTube channel back in 2021, maybe. So if you go way down our video list, you can find that if you are just kind of joining our channel or even in the last year and you didn't know this was here. I interviewed the author of that book. Of course, one of the standards, Norman Friedman's book on U.S. destroyers. And then I also use the website shipbuildinghistory.com. That's shipbuildinghistory.com. If you've never been to that site and you are kind of like me and you love kind of the industrial history of things, this is where I really naturally gravitate working here, is the construction, the industry, the manufacturing. And of course, I just never can spend enough time on it. Multiple books can be written to supplement Thomas Heinrich's book on the subject. But whoever put together, shipbuildinghistory.com did a wonderful job. They talk about the Navy yards, they talk about the private yards, they talk about the emergency yards, and within each yard, they will list every single ship that was constructed there. Yeoman's work, no doubt about it. And it's a very reliable resource from what I've found. I've verified with other sources, and it seems as though for most of them, the dates are correct, or at least for all of them, for the ones that I looked at, all of the dates are correct and things like that. So I've got one of our handy dandy PowerPoints, the infamous PowerPoints that I know everyone loves. And away we go. Title, what's the length of time to build a U.S. destroyer in World War II? So really what I'm focusing on is 1938 to September 2nd, 1945. That includes these classes of ships, but ultimately not every ship of the class. So someone who's got this on point might say, Allen M. Sumner, there are more than 54 ships constructed. But again, I'm focusing on with the buildup after the treaties, and now we're finally building up. The world is changing. There's obvious threats out there. 1938, we begin to disregard those the treaties, the naval, the Washington and the London. Everyone else is ignoring them. And so we begin pumping money back into the U.S. Navy. But this is before 1940 and the 11% and then the 70% acts of 1940. So focusing on the Bensons, there were 30 ships constructed, Gleaves 66, Fletchers 175, the Robert H. Smith class of 12 ships, the Allen M. Sumner of 54, and the Gearing of 14. Through my reading, it seems as though some people place the Robert H. Smith under the Sumner class. They were built on the same platform, different duties, though. At least that was the goal. The Robert H. Smith class of 12 were really meant originally for mine laying and mine sweeping in a larger vessel than traditional mine layers or mine sweepers. Don't believe they ever fulfilled those missions, though. And so they still had a very similar platform to the Sumners. So what I'll do is I'll cover the 14 shipyards that constructed destroyers, the first year of their contracts, and the fiscal year that they were approved, and then what type of ships that they built. And we're going to see, as you can probably imagine, you are all astute and adroit, you can see that earlier ships took much longer. All right, so Bath Iron Works, you can read this list here. Bath Iron Works, 1938, Bethlehem, Quincy, or Fore River, same company, same location. 1938 Benson's, 38 Gleaves and Benson's for Boston, 38 Gleaves and Benson's for Charleston, Federal, 38. Then we get into 1940 with the Bethlehem yards now being added. And then Norfolk, right at the very end, they constructed 2. Right? Same with the Philadelphia shipyard. So I do talk about Fletcher and a few Bensons, all right, at the Bethlehem, San Francisco, San Pedro, and Staten Island. So the way I'm understanding is that those are repeat Bensons after the initial contracts of, as you can see, 1938. Within that time, usually Gibbs and Cox, I'll talk about them in a minute, had the drafting and design plans, but Bethlehem Steel actually developed their own designs specifically for the Bensons, especially in the engineering spaces and the fire rooms and the engine rooms. And so there was some discussion about whether they should continue with the Gibbs and Cox or use the Bethlehem Steel modifications, all right, to the Benson ship design. So I think that's where you're tacking on some Bensons at the very end of construction, of World War II construction, mid to end, at the end of World War II, even though the original contracts were written a few years before. And so that's why you see that. All right, so I'm just really focused on this particular bullet point. I just focus on Gibbs and Cox. All right, they had most of the design work for the Fletcher, Gleaves, and Bensons. Don't talk about the Sumners. I'm sure they designed the Sumners. I just don't have that offhand. Some of those changes that you'll see as we go through the PowerPoint, boy, you might say to yourself, boy, that took a long time, or that was quick. All right, so for Puget Sound in Bremerton, what you had was new construction really took a back seat to repair jobs. So on the West Coast, you had Mare Island and Puget Sound, which were the primary repair yards for ships coming back injured from Pearl Harbor. And I don't mean throughout the war, but they would go to Pearl Harbor and then go to California or Washington. So they could have been damaged in any of the Pacific conflicts. All right, but coming from Pearl Harbor, they would go to Mare Island or Puget Sound, and that really slowed new construction down because, of course, they wanted to repair the ships that were already in service that have been battle tested, do some updating to their either radar or gun platform, and then get them back in. So Puget Sound took a little bit longer than other yards to get some work done on the newer destroyers. For Gulf Shipping, I believe that's the one in Alabama. They had lack of housing and transportation issues for employees, and they did a lot of conversion work. All right, so converting auxiliaries and other vessels, again, took priority over new construction of the 7 Fletchers that they were given contracts for. On the opposite side, you have Bath and Federal, which developed a really strong modular system to free up the dock and the way as quickly as possible. So instead of having all the work being done there on site, on the ways, you can ship that work out, and then all you're doing is bringing it back to that particular way, attaching it, welding it, riveting it, and then adding the equipment as you go on. And so you're not spending all of that time actually building in the way itself. And so that modular approach design, mimicking like the Liberty ships, building them elsewhere, bringing them there, and all you're doing is welding and clamming them together, and then now you can send it down its way and free up that dock to lay another keel. So for the other 12 yards, they didn't really do this as successfully. Some didn't do it at all, but for ones that did, they didn't really do it as successfully as Bath or Federal. So just kind of diving right in. Federal Shipbuilding in Kearny, New Jersey, they constructed 77 destroyers for World War II. And then as we go through, I'll show this for all 14. I don't need to explain it as much. You'll just be able to see it. So the shortest destroyer out of the 77 they constructed was from fiscal year 40. That was the USS Thorn, a Gleaves class, DD 647. And that took only 137 days. And again, that's the quickest destroyer constructed keel to commissioning in all of World War II. The longest was the USS Kearny, DD 432, fiscal year 38. Again, right, when you have yards that are taking on work and building ships that they had not done before, it certainly takes a little bit longer. That's 562 days. For Bath, and the 14 go in order of how many actual ships that how many destroyers they actually constructed. All right, they constructed 65. The quickest was the USS Caperton, DD 650 from fiscal year 41. Again, going back originally, fiscal year 38 took longer, 760 days for the USS Gleaves, the lead ship of the class. So why am I showing a picture where there actually is no water for the Bath Iron Works? That's a great question. Leave me a comment about that. Seattle Tacoma Shipbuilding in Seattle, they constructed 40. The longest was the McCook from fiscal year 40, DD 496. The shortest was 267 days, the USS McKean from fiscal year 42. Bethlehem Steel. All right, now you're bringing in 1940. You're bringing in the Bethlehem Steel shipyards around the country to bolster that 11% and 70% 1940 Two-Ocean Navy Act. Shortest was the USS Monson, the second USS Monson, if I'm getting that right, my memory right, 798 from fiscal year 42. First, the longest was 477, USS Fahrenheit 491. And they constructed 33 destroyers at Staten Island. Now we have San Francisco. All right, this is where USS the Sullivans and all of her sisters were constructed. The USS Miller, the USS Owen, the USS Tingey, and the USS Stephen Potter. They were all constructed next to each other here. All told, San Francisco constructed 30 destroyers. The longest was the USS Strong from fiscal year 1942, DD 758, but the shortest was the Gansevoort 608 from fiscal year 1940 at 328 days. All right, one of the things I just breezed by until I saw it was, even though the Strong was two fiscal years later, it actually took longer. So that's something I'm just tabulating all the data, but now I see that, so I'm going to do a little more research into that. Or again, if you have a comment, leave that there as to why a more recent construction would take longer than an earlier construction, given the fact that now the experience is built up, the workforce is built up. Interesting. I'll look into that. Boston Yard built 26 destroyers. Longest was 729 days. The USS Lansdale from fiscal year 38. Again, that pattern. Fiscal year 1941 for the Haywood L. Edwards, 663. That was 206 days. Bethlehem Steel San Pedro, 21, constructed 569 days for the USS McClanahan from fiscal year 1940, shortest 293 days. The USS Hugh W. Hadley, 774 from fiscal year 1942. Charlestown constructed 18 destroyers in total, 845 days for the fiscal year 1938 contract for the Hillary P. Jones, 278 days for fiscal year 1940, the Paul Hamilton. Consolidated Steel, they built 12 destroyers. Longest days was 594. Even the shortest was still pushing 400 days. The USS McKee from fiscal year 1940. Being on the coast like that, I can imagine them doing repairs, conversions, a lot of auxiliary work to get it up to the coast to New York, and then part of the convoys across the Atlantic. So maybe they got displaced a little bit with their new destroyer construction, right? Either refitting or building emergency convoy ships. Puget Sound in Bremerton, 10 destroyers constructed. Now, look at that, right? So 103 days for the USS Lutz, 481. I have her stats at the end, at least. She, as you can see, she was laid in June of 41. But if you don't know offhand, or maybe you'll be able to figure it out of when she was actually commissioned, is pretty astounding. Even the shortest days, 452, that's not that quick of a time period. She was, even though she was fiscal year contract 1940, she wasn't even laid until 1943. So again, being a major center repairing vessels from the Pacific Theater, you can see how that really slowed down even just the 10 destroyers. The Fore River Bethlehem plant, they built 8. You're looking at 856 days for the Mayo in fiscal year 1938, again following that pattern, except for San Francisco. And the USS Ord-Rano from fiscal year 40. Now you look at that, they're cutting down 653 days or so. All right, Gulf Shipbuilding in Chickasaw, Alabama. They constructed 7, 926 days for the Henley there, 553, fiscal year 41. 602 days for the John Hood. Again, you're kind of flipping. You'd think more recent years would be shorter, but here you're also flipping, by a whole year practically. 300, and a little bit less than a full year of time, but it's for an older contract. It's interesting. And we're wrapping it up with the 2 and 2. Norfolk did 2. The first from potentially, maybe not even the first one they laid down, the Herndon or the Shubrick. All right, both fiscal year 41, 481 days, 355. And Philadelphia, both from fiscal year 40, the Butler and the Gherardi. All right, those are a little more compatible in terms of time. All right, we have 130, 126 days or so between the ones at Norfolk. So in all, I think I looked at about 531, 532 destroyers that were constructed beginning in the fiscal year 1938 up to September 2nd of 1945. As I mentioned, the shortest of all of them, all the destroyers, was the USS Thorn, a Gleaned class. Her work started on 15 November 1942. That was when the keel was laid. She was ready to go and to be put into action on the 1st of April. So, yeah, that's 137 days or so. The longest, as we mentioned, was the Lutz. Look at that. Went down the 3rd of June, 1941, the keel. She actually wasn't commissioned until 4 March 1944. So you can see how shipyards really honed their skill set or fell by the wayside depending on other contracts even location of where they were swayed what they would be doing. So I hope you enjoyed that little look. Please leave questions, comments. I'm going to see if I can find out a little bit more about Bethlehem, San Francisco. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. If you're big fans, please be on the lookout for 29 and 29 for the month of February. Beginning to work and research on all of those videos, and they will be one after another for all those months. Can't thank you enough for all of your support. We know it's a little desolate down here now, and we miss having people. And if you've been here, we miss having you down here. And we'll see you again, or at least I'll see you again soon on the next video. And again, thanks for everything.